Hello students. In this series of videos, we're going to go through a general college ecology course for biology majors. In this first video, we're going to define species, populations, communities, and ecosystems. We're going to identify interactions between abiotic and biotic factors in the environment and begin to discuss human impacts to the Earth's functioning. In each video, I will present you with a list of vocabulary. I expect you to pause the video at this time and write the vocabulary down and the definitions and save some space in the margin for you to write questions that might show back up in an assessment of these learning materials. Taking notes is part of making learning a more active process. So, ecology is the study of interactions between organisms in their environment, which determine their distribution and abundance. Distribution is where they are, and abundance is how many of them there are. So, when we talk about ecology, there are two main bins of things that contribute. There's living factors and non-living factors. Non-living factors are largely controlled by where you are in the planet, in latitude and in altitude. But they include things like precipitation, temperature, and nutrient cycling, soil substrate, pH, etc. The biotic factors are all the living components of the ecosystem, including all the species of all kingdoms, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, archaea, decomposers, primary producers, tertiary consumers, everybody. And the biotic factors that we look at as ecologists often include the interactions between these organisms. How are they competing for food? How are they working together for survival? Who is prey and who is predator? In this picture, for example, we're looking at the Hudson River in New York. These are called the Tivoli Bays. So in the foreground of the picture, we can see one part of the ecosystem, the upland, where I'm standing taking the picture. We can see these woody shrubs, and the overstory includes evergreen trees and herbaceous plants on the ground. I can see the soil under my feet. But then, as we reach the interface between the river and the terrestrial landscape, we have these huge wetlands called Tivoli Bays. So notice that the vegetation inside the wetland is different than the vegetation on the bank. There we have mostly wetland grasses, and those plants are interacting with their abiotic factors in completely different ways. Their feet are completely soaked in water at all times. And then we can't really see it, but beyond the bays, we have the open water of the river. So having a giant river in the middle of a terrestrial landscape really changes the climate there, the microclimate. We'll talk about that in the next video. And just an example of how you can have lots of different organisms living in the same near ecosystem. So when we think about ecological hierarchy, we're going to skip over these first four boxes of the biological levels of biological organization. So in general bio, you already learned that all living organisms are made of cells. Inside of those cells, all cells have the same organelles. When cells work together and they produce tissues, and tissues working together produce organs and organ systems. So those are all the ways that we are organized within a single individual. But now let's look at that single individual. This is our purview for ecology. So when we're thinking about the specific individuals, we're going to think about all the individuals of a single species sharing the same word root as specific. All the individuals of the same species that are born, grow, die, etc. do all the things that living organisms do. When we're talking about all the individuals of the same species in a given area, we're talking about a population. When we're talking about all the individuals of all the different species in a given area, we're talking about the community. And when we're looking at the biological community and the abiotic environment, we're really looking at the ecosystem. I want to take a moment here to just think about populations and communities and ecosystems and this phrase "in the same area." So when organisms cannot interact with each other because they are not in the same given area, then we talk about them as separate populations. Because if you have a population of one bird on one continent and a population of the same bird on a different continent, then in theory they are not interacting, they're not sharing their genetic material, and therefore they are distinct populations. When populations become geographically isolated, they might evolve into different species, but not always. Oops, I'll go back here for a second. I just wanted to note here before we leave this lecture that, of course, human beings are biological organisms and they are influencing every ecosystem on the planet. Humans are extremely successful organisms. They've found ways to exploit all sorts of habitats, but as such, humans are having an undue impact on the ecosystems of the world. And so we will discuss that at great length, especially in environmental science, if you're in environmental science with me, but also in, of course, all of our biology courses. So in this video, we define species, populations, communities, and ecosystems. We used the Hudson River as an example, looking at the biotic and abiotic factors in the environment and how they interact. And we began to discuss how human impacts affect the Earth's functioning. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you in class.